Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
Picture this moment when you find yourself standing in the childhood backyard that holds echoes of every family gathering filled with judgments and whispers about your choices, surrounded by relatives who have long viewed your independence as a flaw rather than a strength. While your younger sister basks in the spotlight of her engagement party with her perfect fiancé at her side and her friends openly mocking your supposed imaginary boyfriend as nothing more than a desperate fabrication to avoid the pity of being alone at yet another milestone event that highlights her success over yours. I could have unleashed everything right there in that charged atmosphere, revealing the buried secrets and painful histories that had driven me to create such a shield in the first place. But instead I chose to maintain my composure with a smile that masked the building storm inside me, allowing their laughter to fill the air as if they held all the power and truth, completely unaware that my actual life was poised to disrupt their carefully curated evening in a manner far more dramatic than any summer thunderstorm rolling across the vast expanses of Lake Michigan, ultimately forcing them to confront whether familial bonds could withstand the harsh realities of envy, regret, and the unexpected arrival of truths they never anticipated. As I navigated the rented SUV along the bustling interstate leading away from the heart of Chicago toward the quieter suburbs where my parents had raised us in that unassuming two-story colonial house with its meticulously maintained lawn and white picket fence symbolizing the kind of everyday American dream that often concealed deeper undercurrents of disappointment and unmet expectations, I could not help but feel the weight of those long-avoided family obligations pressing down on me once again after more than a year of deliberate distance from such gatherings that always seemed to amplify the sibling rivalries and parental preferences I had spent my adult life trying to outrun. At 42 years old, with a thriving consulting firm that demanded constant travel between major cities and kept me immersed in high-stakes negotiations far removed from the domestic routines my family cherished, I recognized that skipping Sarah's lavish engagement party would only solidify my role as the elusive black sheep in their narrative, the older sister who had chosen ambition over the traditional path of marriage and children. Even though deep down I harbored a quiet happiness in my independence that they interpreted as isolation born from some inherent flaw in my character. To arm myself against the inevitable barrage of sympathetic inquiries and thinly veiled criticisms about my persistent single status, especially when juxtaposed against Sarah's effortless allure and her engagement to Mark, the dependable finance professional from our old neighborhood who embodied the stability our parents had always idealized, I had devised an elaborate yet understated story about a fictional fiancé named Richard, a composite figure drawn from the anonymous executives I encountered at industry conferences, someone I described as being deeply involved in East Coast ventures that left little room for social appearances, but promised a future filled with shared adventures like quiet weekends at a lakeside retreat in upstate New York where discussions over aged scotch would deepen our connection without the pressures of public scrutiny. This fabrication evolved in my mind as the urban skyline receded into the sprawling flatlands punctuated by familiar outlet malls that evoked memories of adolescent shopping trips marred by arguments over hand-me-down clothes and the subtle favoritism shown towards Sarah's more outgoing personality, transforming what began as a simple deflection into a narrative rich with just enough detail to intrigue without inviting exhaustive interrogation, ensuring it served as a protective barrier against the pitying glances and unsolicited advice that had defined so many past holidays where Sarah's rotating cast of boyfriends received effusive praise while I endured pats on the back for my professional achievements as if they were mere consolation prizes. The insistent buzz of my phone against the passenger seat interrupted this internal rehearsal, drawing my attention to Daniel's name illuminated on the screen in a way that immediately softened the tension coiling within me. For while Richard remained the carefully constructed illusion designed to preserve my privacy amid familial intrusions, Daniel represented the authentic partnership that had quietly taken root 2 years earlier during a drizzling evening at a San Francisco networking mixer, where our mutual skepticism toward the overhyped promises of Silicon Valley had sparked an instant rapport built on genuine understanding rather than superficial charm. He led a discreet tech empire responsible for applications that permeated daily life across the nation without drawing attention to his involvement, a level of success that mirrored my own preference for substance over spectacle. Yet I had chosen to shield our relationship from family knowledge following the devastating betrayal of my marriage to Tom, whose affair with our cousin Lisa had not only fractured my trust in romantic entanglements, but also exposed the opportunistic underbelly of relatives who viewed personal vulnerabilities as opportunities for involvement or gain. When I connected the call through the car's Bluetooth system, his voice emerged steady and reassuring, inquiring about my progress on the drive and whether the traffic had eased beyond the congestion that often plagued these routes, prompting me to respond with a lighthearted account of the delays while deliberately omitting the full extent of the emotional minefield awaiting me at the destination. As I had firmly declined his earlier offer to accompany me by insisting the event was merely a casual backyard affair unworthy of disrupting his schedule across state lines. Our conversation flowed effortlessly into lighter territories, with him recounting a recent boardroom mishap involving overconfident executives whose inflated egos led to comical missteps during presentations. A story he delivered with self-deprecating humor that always managed to lift my spirits, while I shared details of a recent client acquisition that had culminated in a solitary celebration featuring delivery Thai food savored in the quiet of my hotel room, moments like these reinforcing the comfort of our bond without the complications of external judgments. However, as the exit for my parents' neighborhood approached, marked by streets lined with maple trees transitioning into their vibrant autumn foliage that stirred recollections of childhood freedoms now overshadowed by adult resentments, a subtle shift entered his tone when he revisited the possibility of providing support during the evening, his concern evident in the way he phrased it as a casual suggestion rather than insistence. Yet it ignited a flicker of hesitation within me because the risk of their scrutiny piercing through the Richard persona loomed large, particularly if Sarah's social circle decided to transform my fabricated tale into the evening's entertainment by probing with increasingly pointed questions about this elusive partner who had yet to materialize in their lives. Upon arriving at the driveway where my father's aged Buick gleamed under the setting sun as a testament to his unwavering routine, I gathered my overnight bag and adjusted the collar of my navy blouse chosen for its balance of professionalism and approachability, stepping out into the cooling air with a resolve that bordered on anticipation, envisioning the evening as an opportunity to navigate their barbs with poised deflections and perhaps a few sharp-witted retorts that would unsettle their assumptions without escalating into outright confrontation. Just as I secured the vehicle door, another vibration from my phone delivered Daniel's message expressing his thoughts of me and an invitation to reach out should the interactions prove taxing. A gesture that brought a genuine smile to my face as I slipped the device away, oblivious to how those words of solidarity might soon evolve from mere encouragement into the catalyst for an unforeseen intervention, especially with the faint, distant hum of approaching rotors registering in the periphery of my awareness, too remote to identify yet insistent enough to prompt a momentary pause amid the gathering twilight. Entering through the back gate into the sprawling garden where strings of delicate white lights already twinkled against the encroaching dusk like stars brought down to earth for this particular family spectacle, I immediately sensed the collective gaze shifting toward me as if I were an unexpected guest at my own history. Relatives from various branches of our Midwestern clan who had evolved from the chaotic kids of backyard barbecues into adults carrying their own baggage of mortgages, career plateaus, and the quiet envies that simmer beneath such gatherings, all clustered around sturdy folding tables overflowing with classic American fare like creamy potato salad dotted with hard-boiled eggs and racks of slow-smoked ribs that carried the smoky aroma of every summer ritual we'd shared, masking the sharper undercurrents of unresolved tensions and the perpetual comparisons that had defined our dynamics for decades. My mother, ever the orchestrator of these events with her apron tied neatly and her hair swept into a practical bun that spoke of endless hours in the kitchen perfecting recipes passed down from her own mother, was the first to approach, her embrace enveloping me in a warmth laced with the faint scent of vanilla from baking earlier in the day, as she pulled back to appraise me with eyes that held a blend of genuine affection and the unspoken concern about my prolonged absence, murmuring how she had truly missed having me around and how this engagement marked such a joyful chapter for Sarah, her tone subtly inviting me to reflect on my own path, as if the milestone of a ring could measure a life's worth in ways my boardroom victories never could. She guided me through the throng toward the patio area where my father stood sentinel at the grill, his broad shoulders hunched slightly over the sizzling burgers and brats that he flipped with the precision of a man who found solace in routine amid the emotional whirlwinds his daughters often stirred, offering me a quick, firm nod that conveyed his pride in my independence, even as he casually inquired whether I had brought along this mysterious someone special whose existence had become the subject of hushed speculation in recent family emails, the question delivered with a gruff humor that attempted to lighten the probe, but still carried the weight of expectation rooted in the traditional values he had instilled in us both. Sarah dominated the central space near the outdoor fireplace, her figure radiant in a flowing sundress that caught the breeze and accentuated the modest sparkle of her engagement ring as she animatedly displayed it to a group of her former high school acquaintances now turned lifelong friends, with Mark positioned steadfastly beside her in his crisply tucked button-down shirt and khakis that projected the image of reliable partnership our parents had always championed, their easy interplay drawing admiring glances from the crowd and underscoring the effortless way she navigated social waters, while I preferred the deeper currents of solitary pursuits, opting to observe from a slight distance while nursing the tall glass of iced tea my mother had thrust into my hand, sweetened just right with a hint of lemon that evoked countless afternoons spent in this very yard. I noted how Sarah's laughter cascaded like a melody designed to captivate, a talent she had cultivated since childhood when she would command attention at dinner tables with tales of schoolyard adventures while I retreated into books that promised worlds beyond our neighborhood confines, her current bliss serving as a vivid contrast to the solitary path I had carved through years of building my firm from late-night pitches to cross-country deals. When she finally disentangled herself from her admirers and approached me with open arms, her floral perfume enveloping us in a cloud of optimism, she held me at arm's length for a closer inspection before commenting on how fantastic I appeared, truly transformed by whatever successes had kept me away, though her gaze inevitably drifted to my unadorned left hand with an expression that mingled sisterly concern and a subtle undercurrent of superiority, prompting her to ask whether the demands of my career were eclipsing the possibility of real connection or if there existed a partner I had chosen not to disclose amid the flurry of preparations for her big day. Seizing the moment to introduce the Richard narrative amid the ambient hum of conversations revolving around rising property taxes, children's extracurricular triumphs, and the latest neighborhood gossip, I wove the tale with a casual flair that portrayed him as a sharp-minded executive from the bustling New York scene whom I had encountered at a professional summit. Our bond solidified over shared reservations about the corporate grind and culminating in a spontaneous proposal during a secluded weekend escape where the simplicity of the moment outweighed any grand gestures. The cluster of aunts, led by Aunt Carol with her enduring perm and insatiable curiosity that often bordered on intrusion, leaned in eagerly, cooing over the romance while exchanging glances toward Sarah that hinted at skepticism, one of them venturing to express mild disappointment that this intriguing figure had not made the journey to meet the extended family, her words laced with a faux wistfulness that thinly disguised the pleasure derived from speculating on the authenticity of such claims. As the group dissolved into anecdotes about their own courtship escapades, the atmosphere lightened with chuckles over botched proposals and surprise elopements, yet I detected the subtle barbs woven in, such as when one of Mark's colleagues raised a glass to the end of carefree days and shot me a sidelong look implying eternal singledom, or how the cousins traded stories of balanced lives that implicitly critiqued my apparent imbalance, each exchange feeling like a gentle erosion of the barrier I had so carefully erected. With the sun yielding fully to the velvet approach of evening and the garden bathed in the soft luminescence of the lights that now seemed to illuminate hidden facets of familiarity turned strained, Sarah drew me aside to the secluded corner by the blooming rose bushes where we had once confided secrets as preteens before adolescence widened the gulf between us. Her voice lowering to that intimate register she reserved for moments she believed required delicacy, confessing her genuine worry about my solitary arrival and how the preceding family discussions had cast me in the role of the detached achiever pursuing phantoms rather than foundations. Her subsequent embrace carrying an apology for the undercurrents even as it reinforced the divide, promising deeper conversations once the formalities concluded. I countered her concern with a dash of levity, jesting that Richard was likely ensnared in interminable meetings while fantasizing about mastering my family's renowned potato salad recipe, a quip that elicited her laughter but failed to dispel the fragility I perceived in my invention, particularly after catching fragments of dialogue from Sarah's yoga companions at the dessert station where they speculated in hushed tones about the plausibility of my companion being little more than a digital fabrication tailored for the forlorn. Their stifled giggles piercing the night air and igniting a flush of irritation that I masked by retreating to the yard's perimeter where the first fireflies danced like elusive truths. Wandering to the fence line amid the chorus of crickets heralding the night's deepening hold, I retrieved my phone to dispatch a succinct update to Daniel regarding the initial skirmishes disguised as pleasantries, his prompt response infused with an emoji-free wit that assured me of an impending compensatory escape from such provincial pressures. Yet, as I returned the device to my pocket, Aunt Carol materialized with a proffered plate of homemade cookies still warm from the oven, her overly saccharine smile accompanying a comment delivered in a volume calibrated for eavesdroppers that it must prove challenging to conjure an ideal partner from thin air when viable options lingered closer to home. The implication dripping with that patronizing empathy which skirted the edge of outright mockery and solidified my resolve to endure the escalating whispers now coalescing into queries about my mental state, their growing audacity threatening to dismantle the evening's fragile peace long before the stars fully claimed the sky. As the evening progressed into the enveloping embrace of twilight with lanterns igniting one by one to cast flickering golden pools across the tables where guests had settled into the slightly worn metal chairs that bore the marks of countless similar occasions, the air thickened with the lingering sense of charred meats yielding to the effervescent pop of champagne corks, signaling the commencement of toasts that traditionally served as the emotional core of such family celebrations, blending heartfelt sentiments with the occasional undercurrent of rivalry that had always simmered in our gatherings like an unspoken recipe ingredient. My father initiated the proceedings with his characteristic gruff timbre, hoisting his glass high to extol the serendipitous path that had brought Sarah and Mark together in a romance that unfolded with the predictability of a neighborhood success story, emphasizing how Mark integrated seamlessly into our fold as if he had been a fixture all along, his words drawing a swell of applause that rippled through the assembly and momentarily united everyone in a shared sense of continuity, though for me it evoked a poignant reminder of the parallel narratives where my own milestones, such as launching my firm amid economic downturns that tested the resolve of many in our age bracket, received nods rather than narratives, positioned as afterthoughts to the domestic triumphs that aligned more closely with the expectations of stability in middle-class American life. Sarah absorbed the adulation with a luminous poise that illuminated her features under the soft glow, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she rose to thank the assembly for their support and the warmth that had shaped her journey to this point, her voice steady yet infused with vulnerability that endeared her further to the crowd, before she pivoted toward me with an inclusive gesture, inviting the older sister to contribute a few words of wisdom or affection that might elevate the moment beyond her own spotlight. The subtle pressure of that summons carrying the weight of tradition where I was expected to embody maturity and endorsement even as the evening's earlier whispers had already begun to chip away at my carefully maintained equilibrium. Standing with my flute in hand amid the expectant hush that fell like a curtain, I delivered a concise tribute to their evident joy and the promise of adventures ahead, injecting a touch of levity by cautioning Mark in jest that any lapse In chivalry would summon my intervention as the protective sibling, a remark that elicited scattered chuckles and eased the constriction in my chest, allowing me to resume my seat with a semblance of poise while the group's energy subtly recalibrated toward more probing interactions. The shift manifested almost immediately as Sarah's cadre of yoga enthusiasts, clad in their casual athleisure that projected an aura of enlightened wellness amid the more traditional attire of the family elders, clustered closer with inquisitive expressions. One particularly forthright member named Jenna, whose sleek bob framed a face accustomed to unfiltered commentary, inquiring whether my enigmatic Richard constituted a genuine presence or merely an innovative utilization of those matchmaking applications rumored to sustain the social facades of ambitious women navigating the complexities of modern single dom. The ensuing laughter cascaded across the table like a chain reaction, amplified when Mark contributed a good-natured pat on my shoulder accompanied by an assurance that it was all harmless banter suitable for the prelude to matrimonial festivities. Yet the undertone revealed a deeper indulgence in the ritual of elevating the coupled at the expense of the unattached, a dynamic that resonated uncomfortably with the midlife reflections many in attendance harbored about paths taken or foregone in pursuit of balance between career and companionship. Aunt Carol amplified the chorus with her trademark blend of faux innocence and pointed observation, speculating aloud on the potential availability of a sibling to this phantom suitor for other eligible relatives. Her theatrical wink intended to diffuse the sting, but instead underscoring the collective amusement derived from dissecting my apparent romantic void as a counterpoint to Sarah's fulfillment. Opting for restraint over retort, I sustained a composed smile that veiled the rising tide of indignation, recognizing that any vehement defense would only fuel their narrative of defensiveness and confirm their suspicions of fabrication, while silently cataloging the barbs as fodder for a more calculated response that would unfold in due course, deriving an odd measure of empowerment from witnessing their uninhibited glee, as if they were unwittingly fortifying the foundation of my impending revelation. Sarah attempted to redirect the flow by clasping my hand beneath the tablecloth in a gesture of solidarity, leaning in to whisper that their antics stemmed from ignorance rather than malice, though the trace of mirth in her expression betrayed a complicity born from the security of her own position, a dynamic that echoed the long-standing pattern where her social triumphs cast my professional ones in shadow, even as our mother interjected with a reminiscence from my post-divorce dating phase, framing my selectivity as an exaggerated barrier to happiness that bordered on the comical, prompting an eruption of mirth that transformed the toast into an impromptu symposium on my relational shortcomings, glasses aloft in ironic salute to the lofty ideals that ostensibly left me without a tangible partner at this pivotal family juncture. The ridicule matured into peripheral dialogues as plates emptied and the assembly fragmented into smaller enclaves nursing refills amid the symphony of crickets that accompanied the night's maturation. Snippets of conversation drifting my way like errant leaves in the breeze, such as my father's murmured exchange with Uncle Ray lamenting how I ought to emulate Sarah's approach to settling down before opportunities waned, or the aside between Sarah's friend and another guest debating the merits of a quick online verification of my story's veracity, their tones laced with that blend of concern and condescension prevalent in circles where personal narratives become communal property. Seeking momentary respite, I withdrew to the kitchen under the pretext of fetching another beverage, the screen door's familiar slap echoing behind me as I braced against the worn countertop lined with faded family snapshots chronicling our evolution from carefree youth to the stratified adults we had become, me with my studious gaze in school portraits contrasting Sarah's radiant poses, and pondered whether this orchestrated humiliation warranted an immediate counterstrike or served merely as the overture to a symphony of retribution. My phone's subtle vibration interrupting the reverie with Daniel's inquiry into the night's tenor, a lifeline I nearly activated before a burgeoning resonance from outdoors intruded, a low persistent thrum akin to an approaching tempest that reverberated through the window panes and set the suspended glasses to quiver imperceptibly. Emerging once more into the garden where the constellations began to pierce the deepening canopy, I surveyed the scene with heightened acuity as the mechanical cadence intensified, resolving into the rhythmic pulse of helicopter rotors slicing through the nocturnal calm from the northern horizon, sufficiently proximate now to stir the leaves and draw collective gazes skyward in a tableau of bewilderment that silenced the lingering jests, Sarah's laughter faltering mid-note as her features knit in puzzlement while even the most vocal detractors lapsed into muteness, the intrusion manifesting as an improbable harbinger that compelled me to steady my breathing against the surge of anticipation. For in that suspended instant their presumption of my vulnerability teetered on the brink of inversion, my prolonged silence poised to metamorphose from perceived defeat into the prelude of a meticulously orchestrated upheaval. The helicopter's thunderous cadence overwhelmed the residual echoes of jests and clinking glasses as it maneuvered into position just beyond the boundary fence, its powerful spotlight piercing the obscurity like an interrogative beam that exposed the disarray of scattered linens and toppled centerpieces in the garden, while the relentless whirl of its blades generated gusts that scattered paper plates and elicited instinctive crouches from the assembly, a collective flinch born from the surreal intrusion of such machinery into the intimacy of a suburban celebration that had until moments ago revolved around domestic toasts and familial ribbing. Sarah gripped Mark's forearm with white-knuckled intensity, her previously composed features contorting into an expression of unfiltered astonishment that stripped away the veneer of her poised engagement glow, as my mother raised a hand to shield her eyes from the harsh illumination while voicing tentative queries about whether this spectacle emanated from some eccentric neighbor's whim or an ill-timed media stunt, yet I remained anchored in place amid the upheaval, my pulse accelerating not from alarm but from the exhilarating convergence of vindication and trepidation, because I had explicitly discouraged Daniel from making an appearance, only to witness his determination manifesting in this audacious descent onto the adjacent open field that my father had long complained about as underutilized pasture land bordering our property. Daniel emerged from the aircraft with practiced assurance, navigating the downdraft by slightly inclining his frame as he traversed the short expanse to vault the modest wooden barrier separating the landing site from our yard, his attire, a casual bomber jacket layered over a simple button-down and khakis, projecting an air of unpretentious confidence that belied the scale of his arrival, as he advanced directly toward me through the frozen tableau of relatives and friends whose mouths hung agape in a symphony of silenced skepticism. Enfolding me in an embrace that carried the subtle traces of high-altitude leather and his signature understated cologne, he murmured close to my ear with a warmth that cut through the chaos, apologizing for the delay with a playful nod to the aerial congestion en route from the city, before drawing back to face the group at large, his countenance bearing a courteous smile tempered by an undercurrent of wry observation at their dumbfounded countenances that spoke volumes about the swift reversal of fortunes unfolding before them. Aunt Carol's champagne flute slipped from her grasp to shatter against the patio stones in a crystalline punctuation to the stunned hush, while Jenna retreated a pace with a mumbled reference to cinematic excess that failed to mask her evident discomfort, and Sarah's complexion blanched to an ashen hue reminiscent of someone confronting the abrupt dissolution of a long-held presumption, her gaze oscillating rapidly between Daniel and myself as fragments of recognition began to coalesce in her mind. Maintaining his composure with the finesse of someone accustomed to high-profile negotiations, Daniel extended handshakes to my father, who fumbled through introductions in a voice laced with disbelief, then turned to compliment my mother on the evening's culinary spread as though his entrance had been a mere extension of the festivities rather than a seismic interruption. Yet the pivotal rejoinder surfaced when he casually positioned his arm around my shoulders and addressed the assembly with direct candor, remarking that he had caught snippets of the earlier toasts from his vantage in the cockpit and regretted arriving tardy, especially for the segments dissecting fictitious engagements, which struck him as rather poignant projections from individuals who might have overlooked the authenticity thriving just beyond their narrow perspectives. The atmosphere thickened with unease as Mark attempted a strained laugh that evaporated into awkwardness, and Sarah eventually regained her faculty for speech, stammering out Daniel's full identity as the architect behind those ubiquitous applications that advertised on billboards across the Midwest, but whom she had never imagined intersecting with my orbit in such an intimate capacity. Her disclosure tumbling forth in a torrent that validated every prior insinuation they had leveled against my narrative, now rebounding as their collective mortification. Allowing Daniel to steer the discourse while interjecting sparingly with affirmations that framed Richard as a deliberate pseudonym employed to safeguard our privacy in the wake of previous familial indiscretions that had eroded my faith in blending personal spheres. I observed the progressive paling of their expressions deepen into a mosaic of regret and recalibration, the satisfaction of this understated retribution blooming within me like the fulfillment of a long-simmered strategy that delivered poetic justice without descending into acrimony, witty in its precision and gratifying in how it compelled them to ingest the very skepticism they had so freely dispensed. As the initial wave of astonishment subsided and Daniel fielded inquiries regarding the origins of our connection, crafting a narrative around serendipitous meetings at philanthropic events in coastal cities that portrayed my reticence as a byproduct of hard-won discernment rather than isolation, an unforeseen revelation emerged when Uncle Ray, whose penchant for historical anecdotes often veered into boastful recollections of bygone associations, interjected with a mention of his acquaintance with Daniel's deceased father through a defunct commercial venture from the 80s. His eyes bulging as Daniel affirmed the link with a nod of acknowledgement, thereby unveiling an obscure familial thread that predated my own involvement and transformed the evening's dynamics into something far more intricate than mere romantic validation. The gathering persisted in a faltering rhythm, with obligatory cheers directed our way that rang hollow against the backdrop of readjusted egos, but as Daniel drew me toward the quieter alcove by the rose arbor for a private exchange, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of quiet solidarity, he confided that the impromptu flight stemmed from the undertones in my earlier messages hinting at the barb's bite, a decision made to inject levity into the proceedings after gauging the potential for escalation from afar, prompting my appreciative chuckle even as an internal conflict stirred, because this degree of exposure felt akin to breaching a fortified threshold toward vulnerabilities I had meticulously guarded. Particularly when Sarah later accosted me in a shadowed corner of the patio, her tone edged with a blend of accusation and wounded pride for orchestrating what she perceived as a calculated eclipse of her milestone through theatrical means. Dismissing her grievance with a measured quip about the necessities of resilience in environments predisposed to undermine the self-reliant, I navigated the exchange with surface civility, yet as the helicopter's rotors gradually decelerated in preparation for departure, signaling our imminent withdrawal from the fray, a persistent quandary lingered in my thoughts regarding whether this initial salvo of reprisal sufficed or merely ignited a conflagration capable of incinerating the fragile connections I had long debated, preserving the night's unresolved undercurrents poised to propel us into territories where buried histories might surface to demand further reckoning. The subsequent morning unfolded with a clarity that bordered on harshness, sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains of the upscale hotel room where Daniel and I had retreated after the helicopter ferried us away from the garden's lingering disquietude. The kind of accommodation with its oversized bed draped in crisp linens and a balcony offering panoramic views of the Chicago skyline that stood in stark juxtaposition to the provincial confines of my family's suburban enclave, allowing me a brief interlude of composure as I cradled a steaming mug of coffee while reflecting on how his dramatic intervention had not only silenced the taunts, but also unearthed a vulnerability in me that questioned the sustainability of such bold exposures. Amid the intricate web of blood ties and buried resentments, Daniel had departed at dawn for an unavoidable conference call that pulled him back into the orbit of his enterprise, planting a gentle kiss on my forehead with assurances of a forthcoming discussion about formalizing our commitment in the public eye, his optimism serving as a counterweight to the ambivalence churning within me because although the spectacle of his arrival had orchestrated a satisfying inversion of their mockery, transforming smug condescension into flustered retractions that carried the bitter aftertaste of their own presumptions. I grappled with the realization that genuine reprisal extended beyond theatrical flourishes to the deeper excavation of truths that might fracture the already tenuous familial architecture more profoundly than any aerial entrance ever could. Deciding to confront the residual fallout on my own terms, I maneuvered the SUV back along the sun-dappled roads toward the family home where the yard now appeared sanitized of the previous night's debris, yet palpably infused with the aftershocks of revelation. Pulling into the driveway to find my father stationed on the front porch nursing his ritualistic black coffee from a chipped mug that had survived decades of such mornings, his expression a complex tapestry of paternal admiration, intertwined with lingering astonishment as he admitted to having spent the wee hours scouring online profiles and articles about Daniel. Emerging from the digital dive utterly astounded by the scope of my concealed world and voicing a regret for the years in which he had inadvertently marginalized my narrative in favor of more conventional benchmarks of fulfillment. We shared an unhurried embrace that conveyed volumes through its firmness, a silent acknowledgement of the shifts in perception that his words failed to fully articulate before he ushered me inside where my mother hovered in the kitchen amid the aromas of fresh-baked scones and brewing tea, her animated recounting of potential brunch menus veiling the subtle hurt etched in her furrowed brow as she probed gently about the rationale for shrouding such an exemplary partner from our awareness, prompting me to articulate the layered defenses forged from the wreckage of my marriage to Tom and the insidious involvement of cousin Lisa, whose indiscretion had not only shattered my marital illusions, but also illuminated the predatory tendencies within our extended circle that viewed relational fractures as gateways to meddle or extract concessions. The fragile peace shattered when Sarah burst into the living room with the force of unspent grievances, her attire disheveled from a sleepless night and her demeanor a tempest of indignation as she accused me of deliberately sabotaging her engagement milestone through what she framed as a vengeful spectacle designed to redirect all attention onto my romantic coup, her voice escalating over the wilting bouquets from the prior evening that adorned the mantel like faded symbols of interrupted joy, while Mark lingered in the doorway with a subdued presence that hinted at his own emasculation in the wake of the upheaval. The confrontation ignited into a raw exchange where I laid bare the cumulative toll of their derision, the fabricated fiancé as a bulwark against the pity they wielded like a weapon, and Daniel's authenticity as the unassailable core that their skepticism had sought to undermine. Yet she countered with a torrent of defensiveness, insisting my maneuvers cast me in the perpetual role of aggrieved protagonist and diminished the sincerity of her happiness, before unveiling a startling twist drawn from Jenna's nocturnal sleuthing into archived communications from my divorce proceedings, disclosing that Lisa's liaison with Tom had entangled not merely emotional betrayals, but also clandestine family loans that my father had covertly extended to cover Tom's mounting debts, a confidence Sarah had harbored in silence to safeguard the household's facade of unity, the admission landing with the weight of complicity that forced me to confront the extent to which their protective omissions had perpetuated my isolation. Navigating the surge of betrayal that this disclosure provoked, I weighed the merits of extending olive branches for the sake of enduring kinship against the allure of severance that promised unencumbered progress, ultimately channeling the moment's intensity into a deft act of closure by retrieving from my purse the understated diamond ring I had kept sequestered as a talisman of private commitment, sliding it onto my finger with a measured quip about how true value manifested without fanfare or flight paths, its subtle gleam underscoring the disparity between ostentatious displays and the quiet opulence of lives built on merit rather than mimicry, leaving Sarah's features drain once more into pallor as the implications resonated that my trajectory had eclipsed theirs through deliberate choices rather than contrived competitions. Bidding farewell to my mother with a hug that lingered in mutual recognition of the fractures we might never fully mend, and offering my father a nod of tentative reconciliation, I departed the house with the engine's hum carrying me toward the airport where Daniel awaited our return flight, his perceptive inquiry upon my arrival about any lingering qualms over the disclosures met with my ambiguous smile because in the cascade of events, The reprisal had crystallized into a poignant liberation that affirmed my agency yet unearthed the hollowness of triumph when measured against the irreplaceable pull of shared history. As the plane ascended above the receding landscape of intertwined pasts and uncertain futures, I pondered the dangling threads, whether Sarah's pride would yield to a sincere overture of amends or harden into an enduring schism that redefined our sibling bond. And if Daniel's integration into this narrative would fortify our foundation or expose it to similar erosions, and in that suspended ambiguity, the essence of retribution revealed itself not as a conclusive victory, but as a catalyst for introspection, compelling me to question if the most profound form of payback lay in authoring one's story with unyielding authenticity, even when it left the chapters of familial healing tantalizingly unresolved amid the vast expanse of possibilities that life continually unfurled.